Brendan O'Neill, Chief Political Writer at Spiked Online. A very, very good afternoon to you.
Hi, Julia. How you doing?
Thank you very well indeed. Lovely to have you here. There's lots I want to talk to you about. Can we just start, first of all, with two-tier justice? Because we are in an absurd scenario where, as of today, we were supposed to be seeing what the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, dubbed Two-Tier Tuesday. And the sentencing guidelines issued by the Sentencing Council basically were saying start as of today, but they've backed down because they're facing legislation to stop this going ahead. That basically courts should treat people from different racial, religious, sexual proclivity, and whether they're trans or not, treat them differently in terms of whether or not they should get a pre-sentencing report. This is largely, usually, to try and see if you're going to mitigate the sentence, give them a softer sentence. But after they backed down on this, we also learnt more about this issue, this guidance issued to police, telling them that they should be aiming not for equality under the law, but equity, so that they would have to treat black and other minorities differently to how they treat white people, suspects or defendants, because of their race and because of, even they were saying, community trauma. What do you make of this, complete twisting of the principle of blind justice?
Absolutely, that's exactly what it is. And, the guidance that the police are talking about, I noticed that it said, being in favour of racial equality doesn't mean being colourblind. Yes, it does.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Literally what it means, yes.
That's exactly what it means. And there's a reason that Lady Justice is often depicted with a blindfold, because the law is supposed to be blind. It's supposed to rule without fear or favour. And it's not supposed to judge people on the basis of their heritage or their skin colour or their sex or anything else. If it's true, and it is true, that in the past, people from certain minority groups were treated more harshly by the cops and by the law, that is true. But you don't fix that by then racializing the justice system in order to prevent that from happening, because that then just makes it unfair for people who are white and heterosexual and male, etc., etc. You do it by being colour blind. You don't give someone a harsher sentence because they're black, and you don't give someone a harsher sentence because they're white. And the fact that our cops and some of our legal system doesn't understand this, that's really worrying.
Yeah, and so much of this comes from critical race theory, something which most sane people avoid like the plague, which has this whole theory that by definition, white people are oppressors and are racist. By definition, people of colour must be victims. And they're very much drawing on the American history of race relations, which is based on, pretty much everyone who was black in America was a slave, was taken there against their will, outrageously treated. If they've survived the journey across the Atlantic. And indeed, we had laws in our, certainly in my lifetime, Jim Crow laws and others, which were, basically racially segregated. But we don't have any of that history here. People in this country who are of ethnic minorities have chosen to come to this country. We've never had laws that have prevented, black people from voting or having the same civil rights here. We just don't have that history. And yet there's been importation of basically Black Lives Matter propaganda, whether it's about policing or whether it's about, justice in society, the economy, you name it, everything, that somehow the majority white population is oppressing the minority black population. And often stats are brought out on this. People say, black people are getting longer sentences, black people are more likely to get custodial sentences. I looked up the stats on all of this before I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago for The Sun. And actually an awful lot of this is frankly untrue. Different ethnic groups do have different outcomes, but largely actually it seems to be for demographic reasons in terms of whether you live in an inner city, whether you're more likely to be in a social and economic group which is poor, whether you're more likely to have a dad in your home or not. Massive impact. Whether you're likely to plead guilty at all or at an earlier stage in the proceedings, and the sorts of crimes that are committed by different ethnic groups because of those demographic and other reasons. All of that gets swept aside. We just have a blanket. Black people are hard done by, white people are privileged, end of. And it's too simple.
It's way too simple. But you know what, Julia, we're not allowed to talk about all those complex social, cultural problems that you're mentioning there.
Where are the dads? Where are the dads?
Exactly. And, Lord Sewell made this point a few years back. I know he's in the headlines for something else at the moment, but, this man is a font of common sense as far as I'm concerned.
This is Tony Sewell, who's written fantastic reports on these exact issues.
Exactly. And a few years ago, he made the point about fatherlessness. He made the point that there is a great social tragedy in this country that no one wants to talk about, which is that almost 50% of black kids grow up without a dad. And that does push young black boys in particular into gang culture, where they go looking for authority figures
Yep.
elsewhere. These are important social tragedies that deserve more of our attention, but we're not allowed to talk about them in all their complexity. We just have to nod along to the kind of American imported idea that everything is down to racism, everything is down to whiteness. But, I think in relation to all of this, Shabana Mahmood deserves a lot of credit, actually, because,
She's the Justice Secretary. She said she would stand up against this and bring in legislation against this.
That's right. And in her showdown with the Sentencing Council, she has asserted the sovereignty of Parliament against this arrogant quango that thought it could do whatever the hell it wanted. And she's also asserted the ideal of equality before the law. Whether her party, Labour, can keep running with this devotion to equality is another question. But she has actually done incredibly well in this fight, and she deserves a lot of credit for that.
Absolutely. Again, though, she did point out, as a Muslim woman myself, I don't want to be treated differently. But again, you get into these situations where she can only say that because she's a Muslim woman and she's from a minority, and we get into this ridiculous scenario where what your utterly irrelevant ethnic or other background becomes more important than what you're saying, which is a craziness. But interestingly, you mentioned the sovereignty of Parliament, and this ties in, of course, with the immigration. Another story today. There's the huge number of people coming across, illegal migrants that we basically can't tackle because we can't stop the pull factor, which is, regardless of how you tackle smashing the gangs or anything else, at the end of the day, people want to come to this country because they believe they'll be able to stay here and work here, black market or not, that they're going to still want to come. And we've had these battles over the Rwanda policy, which was never going to, on its own, make a big change. It wasn't the same as the Australia policy, where no one sets foot in the country and they dealt with it within a few months. But the principle that Parliament is sovereign, not the courts. Parliament can change the law, withdraw themselves from, withdraw the country from the European Court of Human Rights and Convention on Human Rights and all of that. This is the thing. This very much ties into this. We have so many unelected, unaccountable quangos, courts, judges, justices themselves. And although on the individual cases they're entitled to make those individual decisions, they are applying across the board, I say, values and guidelines which simply do not tally with what the democratic public actually think.
Exactly right. And, as you say, they have the right as judges, of course, to make judgments on individual cases. But it too often leads to a new value system, or it too often is done openly to show up the government, to say to the government, well, you're wrong, you're not allowed to do this. We don't care that millions of people voted you into power because we know better than them. Yeah. That is what a lot of this lawfare fundamentally boils down to. We had a civil war about this in this country 350 years ago, which established the primacy of the House of Commons, the primacy of the elected wing of government over all the other wings of government. And it's in our Bill of Rights, the idea that if there was anyone outside of the Commons that has more power than the Commons, then we live in a tyranny, not in a democracy. And we are sleepwalking into that very situation. But there is so much we need to do to make sure this doesn't happen. We have to get out of the ECHR, in my view. We have to rethink our commitment to the Refugee Convention. We have to dismantle a lot of human rights law, which is actually about empowering judges rather than protecting human rights, yep, and assert the right of ordinary people in Britain to determine the fate of the nation.
And this goes all the way back to the attempt to overturn Brexit, either through the courts or through we just won't enact, we'll just stop it from happening, we'll make every possible challenge possible, when it was the blatant and clear will of the British people, blaming it on, it must have been the Russians, it must have been this, it must have been, and the attempts, the legal attempts, the electoral commissions, arresting and the cases that were brought against Aaron Banks, Leave.eu founder, Darren Grimes, a friend of mine who faced harassment for years and years, when he committed no wrongdoing whatsoever in terms of his use of funds for part of the Leave campaign. And I think a lot of this is being echoed in what's going on in France. Now, we had an outcry in the last few weeks about treatment of the Romanian opposition leader, barred from standing for office, outcry from the liberal left and the centre, outcry over what's gone on in Turkey, where Erdogan, he assumed fairly dictatorial powers in recent years, and his banning of the mayor of Istanbul, his sort of chief opposition leader, from running for office. And now we've seen, and again, liberal left outcry. And now we see yesterday Marine Le Pen, the leader of the French National Rally, I'm going to say hard right rather than far right. I don't like this term far right, hard right party, from banning her from standing for public office, including, of course, the 2027 French presidential election, where she is the front runner on her fourth attempt at running for that office on behalf of her party. She's been convicted of embezzlement. I mean, it does appear bang to rights. Do you think that the decision to bring charges against her party, when we know just how unbelievably corrupt pretty much the whole of the EU is, but her party facing those charges, but also the sentence banning her from standing for public office, do you think this is another form of lawfare against democratically elected politicians?
Absolutely. I am horrified by what has happened to Marine Le Pen. And I say that as someone who could never see himself as voting for her. I'm not a fan of Marine Le Pen, but this is an act of lawfare against French democracy. It seems pretty clear that it's a pretty trumped up charge designed in large part to prevent her from standing in an election that it looks like she would have won. And, every single voter in the French Republic loses out as a consequence of this. Those who wanted to vote for Marine Le Pen lose out, and those who wanted the chance to defeat her at the ballot box also lose out. Everyone has had their rights taken away from them. I just feel that Europe is teetering very precariously on the abyss of authoritarianism, because we had the Romanian case that you mentioned. We know that the EU is incredibly undemocratic and often meddles in countries' internal affairs.
And if you have a referendum and they don't like the result, they make you run it again.
Exactly. So we've had this building up for 20 or 30 years in Europe, where democracy is seen as a disposable thing. Now it's coming to fruition in the blocking of one of France's most popular politicians from standing in an election. This is incredibly serious. And I think all of Europe, whether you're left wing or right wing, needs to be treated as seriously as it deserves.
It is very interesting that even the likes of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who's very much on the far left socially, hard left, he came out speaking out about this. And Viktor Orban of Hungary, and obviously Je suis, Marine. But she's going to appeal, and unusually the ban stands while she appeals, which is going to create difficulties. There is a possibility, though, that this may work out very well for the party. She, although a very popular figure and has very made herself sort of a much more sort of appealing figure, moving close to the centre ground on many issues, and ousting sort of blatant, outright racists from her party, including indeed her own late father. But that she could be replaced by Jordan Bardella, much younger character. He's only around 30. He's a very charismatic, young, handsome man. He himself, the child of immigrants, that he could take his chances at running for the presidency. It may well be that by making her appear more of a victim, this could actually help the party rather than hinder it.
Everyone should know by now that lawfare can often end up making a party more popular or a politician more popular. Look at Donald Trump in America. Yeah. He was attacked by lawfare constantly for the past 4 years. There was a concerted effort by the elites to prevent him from standing to be president. And his popularity just grew and grew and grew. I think we could definitely see a similar blowback in France. And also, the other thing about France, and one of the reasons I secretly love France, is that it has a very fiery history. It has a very revolutionary history. People like to take to the streets there, which I think is their prerogative. That could happen too. The idea that you can put a lid on voters' emotions and desires and who they want to see in the presidential palace, and that there won't be any blowback, I think we're in for a surprise.
And we've seen the French farmers, basically blocking routes into Paris, and we saw during the French Olympics as well, Paris Olympics, they're taking action. Of course, the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vests. I mean, they managed to overturn laws. There's no doubt at all. And again, of course, with the current president, Emmanuel Macron, incredibly unpopular. I mean, basically, he's only ever got in both times simply because he wasn't Marine Le Pen. And that's really rather changed in recent years. We shall see what happens there. It's very interesting. You mentioned Donald Trump there. Let's just finally talk about Donald Trump. He calls it Liberation Day tomorrow. I'm not quite sure what people are being liberated from, the imposition of tariffs. Now, across the world, we've had some tariffs already announced, some already in place. No one's really sure what the tariffs are going to be or which countries they're going to hit, which goods, at what amount. He said it's going to be the same as the tariffs other countries impose on US goods being imported to their countries, but it's going to be lower than that. I don't know. It can't be the same and lower at the same time. No one seems to know, least of all Donald Trump. He doesn't even know what a tariff is. He thinks VAT here is a tariff. Of course, it's not. It's sales tax on all goods, including those made here. But how worried are you about this? And worried that not only does this impact our economy and the world economy, that a trade war could actually escalate into something more serious, given where we are with Russia and Ukraine, where we are also with China. We've seen these absolutely terrifying military exercises surrounding Taiwan in the last 24 hours after very belligerent talk from China about willingness to take Taiwan by force. How concerned are you that this tariff war is the start of something we might not be able to control?
Yeah, it's unpredictable and it is worrying. And I often find myself thinking, what's going to happen next? You often feel that you can predict where politics is going to go, but at the moment, I don't feel that at all. And the thing is that it's very clear now we live in a wholly new world. The era of globalism is falling apart. The era of global institutions is falling apart. In some ways, that's good. These were often very undemocratic, interventionist institutions, but it also opens up a new era of unpredictability. I don't think Trump is the single-handed author of this new period, but he definitely is hurrying it along. And we know from history that trade wars and economic tension can often boil over into something else. So we do need to keep level heads, even as we're talking about serious matters like this.
Absolutely. Always so good to talk to you, Brendan. I know we're going to have hopefully we'll speak again in the next week as well, but certainly in 2 weeks' time, Tuesday the 15th of April, we're going to be doing a live podcast with Spiked for your podcast at 7 o'clock, I think live it is, on Tuesday the 15th of April. Very much looking forward to doing that with you.